Okay, Councillor Stern, you ready?
Councillor Stone, you're still muted.
Chairman, you're on mute.
Councillor Stern, you're muted.
Somebody muted me.
You're there, Councillor. Would you like to begin?
You do that. Right. Welcome to the planning meeting, 8th of July, everyone. That's members, officers and speakers. We have an agenda tonight, and it's quite a long agenda, and we have a lot of speakers. Can I ask the speakers, please, to make sure that they keep their speeches to a minimum, because there are 17 of you, and still say what you've got to say and try not to repeat the points that others have made. So we'll crack on to the agenda straight away. Can I have the apologies, please? I guess that's Charlie, is it?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from councillors Roger Glitherow and Barbara Jenny.
Thank you. I hope you've all read the minutes from the last meeting, 10th of June. Is it your wish that I sign those away when I can?
Aye. Aye.
No problems, thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest and informal site visits. So the first is declarations of interest. Do we have any?
Chairman.
Robin?
Yes, it's another interest in application 19/01935/4. I know the agent, John Sidey.
Okay, thank you. Who else had their hand up? Is that you, Jeff, at the bottom? That's it. Jeff?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. It's just for the Newbrook Farm Titchmarsh. It's another interest. The applicant and the agent are known to me, and I did observe a village meeting regarding this earlier this year, but took no part.
Thank you, that's okay. Anyone else? Come on then, who's that? I hardly see you now. Is that Peter?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Carry on then. Carry on.
Councillor Peter Thomas here. Need to declare another interest in planning application number 19-01623-full. This is the application for Newbrook Farm in Titchmarsh. My company has worked at this site in the past, a few years back now, it's true, but we've been there a few times working on the site, and therefore I need to inform the members of that. And also I need to declare an interest, another interest in planning application 19-01935-FUL. This is the application for College Street, Irthlingborough. My company has worked for the applicant in the past, and we don't work for the applicant at the moment, but we have done work in the past, so I need to declare that. Thank you.
Okay, Peter, for the sake of knowledge, have you been to either of those sites or talked to any of the employees recently?
No.
Fine, thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Sophie, have you got any? Can you see anyone's got one?
Yeah, Chairman, I think Councillor Mercer has put in the chat in an informal site visit, is that correct?
Councillor Jill Mercer here. I did an informal site visit to the application in High Street, Rushton. Just looked round, but didn't speak to anybody.
Thank you. Dudley? Microphone.
You're muted.
Yes, if we've driven along, I've driven along that road many times and viewed where this application would be.
Dudley, can you start again? We didn't hear the beginning.
Right. For 19/012838 for the Woodford application, I've driven along that road many times and had a look to see where this application would be, but not spoken to anybody.
That's okay. That's fine. Robin?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's the High Street in Royston. I went there the other evening to have a look, but I didn't speak to anybody.
Okay. Andy?
Well, thank you, Chairman. 19/01569 Rushton High Street, 105 Rushton High Street. I have paid an informal visit there as well, but I didn't speak to anyone. I just went to try and get some feel for the geography.
Fine, thank you. Sophie, any others?
Chairman, I can't see any others in the chat and no one else that I can see with their hands up. If anyone else does have their hand up, could you speak now?
Really chat, I guess. But, okay, that's fine. And that's declarations of interest and site visits. We've mixed the both together there, haven't we? You're all happy with that? It's all done? That's item 3. Item 4 is questions for members, please, Charlie.
Thank you, Chairman. There were no questions received.
Great. Item 5 is the Section 106 agreements and the delegations to Head of Planning. Carolyn, are you taking that?
No, I'm not taking this tonight. Dean's going to take it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. All yours, Dean.
Good evening, members. Not a lot to say on these two matters. On Section 106, the only updates are to Rushton Living and Cotterstock Road in Oundle. With Cotterstock Road, the outline planning permission for that has now been issued. And with Rushton Living, that has it's not been called in by the Secretary of State. The Section 106 is now being worked on, and with a bit of luck, it might be issued later this month. On Priors Hall, which I didn't mention a minute ago, an update may be forthcoming at the next meeting on that one, but not this evening. And there are no extensions requested on any of the ones there so far.
Okay.
On delegations, there are 2 applications related to Brooks Road in Raund, 19/01630 and 19/01633. Both of those refusals have now been issued. Manor Farm in Glapthorne, which is 20/00148. That was an overturn previous meeting. Since the agenda was published, the conditions have now been agreed with the applicant and have been sent to the relevant members for their agreements. I think we've had a couple of replies, but not all of them as yet. So that's progressing as well. And an item that's not on the list, but I just wanted to draw members' attention to it, is the Calvic Plantation consultation we received from Corby recently. East Northants, as our committee, we objected to that scheme. And I actually attended their meeting, first of all, on the 23rd of June, but it was adjourned because it had a lot of late information. So they adjourned for almost a week to allow that to be considered. So I then attended again last Monday, the 29th of June, put forward ENC's objections, which were mainly on highway grounds, but also the principle of development and other concerns. But sad to report that they did resolve to approve the application subject to conditions in a Section 106 agreement. That's
okay, thank you for trying.
Okay, I tried.
Anyone got any questions of Dean? No? Right. Then we'll take that report as great. So we move now to the applications for tonight. And I hope you've all read the update sheets that have been flying around the last couple of days. And we'll start with the first application on page 3, which is the Titchmarsh application. And Wayne, are you there?
Chairman, it's Gavin Sylvester who's going to present it. That's me on behalf of Wayne, who's not here today.
Okay, Gavin, crack on.
I'll take it away. Right, good evening all. I'll just share my screen to get the presentation up. Right, I'm hoping you can see the presentation now. If you could confirm that, Chairman. Great, right, we'll start from here. Application in Titchmarsh for the change of use of agricultural land and buildings to haulage yard, plus uses in B1, B2 and B8, that's industry and storage, plus some erection of security fencing and gates. The application does follow a previously refused application, whereas that previously refused application proposed that 7 units would change use. This application now proposes that 5 would change use, with the other 2 remaining in an agricultural use. It is also now proposed that the units will be restricted to the current purposes that they are being used for, which prevents sort of movement within the use classes and amalgamation of those units. Also, it is now proposed that the area to the rear of the site that's currently being used for parking is excluded from this application. And you'll find the specific uses for each units proposed listed in paragraph 2.3 of your report. And apart from the objection of the parish council, there are no objections from statutory consultees. Running through the slides, the recommendation is, of course, that permission be granted subject to conditions as set out in the report. And going through some photographs of the site, this is a view of the southern boundary of the site as you approach the village from the south, and the site is obviously in the centre of the photograph. Second photograph, the buildings in question for this particular application behind the gates. A photograph further along the road showing the site and the access gates and the fencing. Moving through to a photograph of the parking area that I said earlier had been excluded from this application. And lastly is the site plan showing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units, area of hard standing, lorry parking, access, and that's the road that runs from and into Titchmarsh to the north, and the area that we referred to previously as for parking that's excluded from the application is shown just here. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much, and I'll refer it back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gavin. Well done. We now move to the speakers on this particular application. The first of which is Mr. D. Ellis, who's an objector. Are you there, sir?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Carry on with your points, Mr. Ellis.
Okay. 15 months ago, this committee rejected an application on this site for the same B1, B2 and B8 uses. To these, we have now added a further use, haulage. A member of this committee at the time stated, "It is simply the wrong application in the wrong place." It remains so. At the time, the case officer went into great detail why these uses on this site did not fit with the JCS plan, the rural plan or the national policy planning framework. Why now do these uses suddenly fit with all of these plans and frameworks? Villagers are still being disturbed by noise from Halden's Parkway. Newbrook Farm is 800 metres nearer to the village. Noise will be an issue, especially as there are no conditions attached limiting hours of operation. Indeed, B8 use implies 24/7 operation. With regard to employment opportunities, simply storing items on the site does not constitute generation of employment opportunities, or conversely, job losses if permission were refused. Businesses would move to other local sites with the correct planning permissions in place. We believe the haulage company already has a proposed site in place at a nearby location. Road safety remains the major concern. The National Planning Policy Framework states sites should not have an unacceptable impact on local roads. We would argue that this application does. Furthermore, the Highways Authority has already stated the road width is substandard. The local council has worked hard to reduce lorry traffic down this road. signs near Primark and a pinch point have been introduced, yet this proposal undoes this work and actively encourages an increase in HGV traffic. There are no conditions limiting the number of vehicles that can be operated from the site. We believe the operator has already applied to increase the number of licenses he can use. The Highways Authority also said that a condition forcing vehicles to exit right should be included. This has been ignored in the report recommendations. Significantly, what is also ignored in the report is the warning of your own senior planning officer, Mr. Watson, who in 2011, when temporary planning permission was given to Dodson and Horrell to use this site, wrote that highway safety would be impacted were a permanent permission granted. I wonder if this committee were to ignore this warning from their own chief planning officer, would they or the council be opening itself up to litigation were a serious accident to occur on this road? Finally, I would ask what message the planning committee is intending to send out. Is it that there is a proper planning process in place, or rather simply build first, use as you wish, and then apply retrospectively? If turned down, simply apply again and again, just tweaking the application each time.
That's 3 minutes.
For these reasons, I would ask that you uphold your decision of last year.
We got that loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second speaker is Sarah Wilcox on behalf of Titchmarsh Parish Council.
Good evening.
Hi there.
Good evening. It is
Hello,
evident.
Sarah.
Hello, I'll continue. It is evident in the delay of the decision-making process that this application has been problematic. There has been disappointment in how this development has gone unchecked for so long, and there is scepticism that future monitoring of the site, however it turns out now, will be effective. Titchmarsh is a vibrant village with strong community values, and we understand that planning procedure is there for a reason. However, absolutely nothing has changed in terms of use here, and our objection still stands. What I do wish to highlight again is the unsuitability of the road, particularly how narrow it is and the environmental damage being done to verges. There is a real concern in the village about safety. The transport statement in 2018, which is 2 years ago, states that 2 HGVs can pass on the carriageway. This is simply not true. A large car has to get up onto the verge to pass. This is a potential danger to pedestrians, dog walkers, runners, cyclists, as well as parents taking their children to school. This is the only lane for villagers to walk to Thrapston unless they use the A605. And there has already been one serious accident on this road. I would not want that to happen again. I would not want that on my conscience. And I would ask Highways to return again to reassess the situation. If signage directing traffic away from the village was removed, this would also increase traffic problems. The road narrows even further into the village, and there are a number of young families living in housing at the village entry near the Grade 1 listed almshouses. Again, there is no footpath here, despite assurances back in 2014. And damage has also been reported on verges in front of the almshouses from HGVs. Another point, regarding employment, there seem to have been inconsistencies in the estimates of employees at the site. Is it 60? Is it 14? I know personally of no villagers working there. We know that we need to promote diversification of the economy. North Northampton has an oversupply of committed employment land, particularly in the B1 sector. Remains strong in this area, but a key concern of the core plan is to maintain the character of smaller villages. This application goes against that. I appreciate your time and hope you're able to make a decision which is representative of the strong feelings of the surrounding community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And the third speaker is Andrew Middleditch, who is the agent.
Chair, I hope you can hear me.
I can, Andrew.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Andrew. I can hear you.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's good to be with you all again, despite these unusual circumstances. This is not the first time I have spoken on this site, and as your officer's report points out, this is a resubmission of a previous application refused by the committee. In response and recognition of that earlier decision, we've consulted with your officers to establish whether there is a way to address your concerns and regularise the planning for this site. I repeat what I said at the previous meeting. It is not desirable that we are having to deal with a retrospective application. However, we have modified the proposals in line with your officer's advice to address the concerns that you raised previously and to provide you with the necessary control over the site that you need going forward. It is acknowledged that there was concern about the scale of the activities proposed under the previous application, and therefore we have reduced the proposals. 2 units have been removed from the application, and these will remain as agricultural buildings with no proposal for change of use. The application also relates to the existing occupiers only, and with the requirement that the lawful use of the buildings will revert to agriculture once existing occupiers leave, unless you approve otherwise. We have also reduced the size of the site with a commitment to reinstate an area of hard standing at the rear to agriculture and proposals to landscape the rear boundary. Once again, the application is reported to you with no objection from your Environmental Health Department on grounds of noise or lighting, and the conditions and informatives which your officers are recommending reinforce this. We have satisfied the Highway Authority regarding the standard of the access and the way that the site is operated to prevent vehicles leaving through the village. The most powerful endorsement of this application is from your Economic Development Officer, who strongly supports the application. We have made the case that the existing use of the site supports 63 people, of whom 43 live within a 2 to 3 mile radius of the site. Even if these figures are questioned by some, there can be no doubt that the site does provide local employment and economic benefits, as confirmed by your Economic Development Officer and the case officer. In these difficult times, it is even more important that we support proposals that create and support jobs. The idea of utilising agricultural buildings for alternative use, including employment uses, is not alien to planning policy. Indeed, it is supported by planning policy with a range of permitted development rights, allowing change of use without the need for planning permission. We recognise in this case that there is concern about the scale of the activities, and we have sought to address this by reducing the amount of floor space proposed, reducing the site area, and accepting a permission which is restricted to the existing occupiers. We hope that you will recognise the changes that we have made in consultation with your officers, and we hope that you will support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew Whittleditch. That's the 3 speakers on this particular application. So we now move to the ward member. Councillor Shatlock, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I brought this to committee last year, and well, here we are again. This is not that similar to the last retrospective application. My feelings still are that there are issues with heavy traffic coming in and out of Titchmarsh, as well as road safety on the Titchmarsh to Thrapston Road, in particular for pedestrians and cyclists on a very, very narrow road. I also appreciate that there is an advisory sign asking traffic to turn right out of the site, but quite frankly that is as useful as a chocolate fire guard. But I understand that highways will not enforce that right-hand turn, and nor will they restrict traffic in and out of Islington. So I feel my hands are tied on that. I would like to ask the officer 2 questions. How strongly can these conditions be upheld in the future, in particular to restrict the units solely for their current uses, and the retention of the security fencing to prevent further extension of the site? And that's really all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Gavin, can you answer those?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you very much. Like any conditions, we impose them to make sure that they are capable of being enforced. So, of course, any breaches of conditions in the future would, of course, be investigated. Moving on to the second point, which was, could this move on to land? If I heard right, was could it move on to land outside of the application boundary? If it did, that would be a discussion for another day. This, of course, is just the application for what's occurring within the application site itself and nowhere else. So I hope that answers the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Anyone else? Andy? Sorry, Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a simple question for the officers. how enforceable are all of the conditions? So, for instance, if the operator was to start having a slightly different activity in one of the sheds, how enforceable would be the condition to prevent it?
Enforceability is, of course, to test for conditions. So if an occupier, let's say occupying the unit for vehicle repair and maintenance, if they deviated from that materially and materially changed the use beyond that, then it could be liable for enforcement action. But again, that would be down to an investigation at that point in time. Thank you.
Andy?
That's something like what I was expecting to hear. And now's my follow-up question. What is the definition of materially in this context?
Material is something that matters, something that is different to the extent that it matters. Ultimately, it's something that is, of course, to be determined by the courts in accordance with the definition of the word material. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jill Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One is to do with this, the actual limiting of these uses. So if, for instance, not just that somebody might change what they're doing, but if one of these units moved out and somebody else wanted to move in, would they need to bring a new planning application forward? So that's
it all depends. Sorry, Chairman, can I answer that?
Carry on.
Too quick. Right. In terms of let's say Unit 1 vehicle repair and maintenance, providing the next person who came in was complying with that particular limitation, so carrying out vehicle repairs and maintenance from the unit, then they would be complying with the condition.
What I was meaning is if it was a different use, it may be one that doesn't cause any problems, but from the speaker, it sounded as though if they were not going to be used, he said it would revert to agricultural, but there's nothing in the conditions that says that.
No, there isn't. No, you're quite correct, there isn't. I mean, actually, the use of land and buildings for agricultural purposes is not development. So they could revert back to agriculture without needing an application.
Right. Sorry, the second question was to do with the right turn. And Councillor Shacklock has mentioned that highways wouldn't enforce that. Is it possible for us to actually put a condition to say there must be one, and that they must tell their drivers that they must not only turn right going out of the site, but that delivery drivers should not come in through Titchmarsh?
In answer to the question, Chair, we've worked with the County Council to determine the necessity for this right turn sign, and the County Council agree that it's not necessary. If you have a look through that section of the report and read the chronology of the consultations with the County Council Highways, you will see that that's what's said. Also, the applicant doesn't have powers to put a sign up in the highway. Only the Highways Authority can do that. Not only that, it would be very difficult to enforce which vehicles were coming from this particular site. Also, if we were to put signs up around the village. But the ultimate reason is it's no longer necessary, according to the County Council. So that's the answer to that. Thank you.
My final question, Chair, is the area that is no longer allowed for use of the parking. On the picture, there were a lot of cars parked in that area. If those cars are presumably, I don't know, people that are working there, if they are not to park in that area, which I can understand because we wanted to limit it, where would they park? And would that cause a danger to, would they try and park on the road, which I'm not sure there's even the width there to do so, but where would they park instead, and is it going to cause a problem?
There is quite a large area of hard standing on the site itself, but we also believe that some of those cars, if not all, are possibly owned by the landowner. but ultimately we felt that it was unacceptable to have it encroaching into that particular area. So that will be dealt with separately to this planning application.
Okay.
Chairman, we've got Councillor Pentland and Councillor Wilkes would like to speak, please.
Okay, Councillor Pentland.
Thank you, Chair. I share concerns regarding the highways aspect of this planning application. And it's clear from the committee report that although Titchmarsh is a fairly small village, there are 38 representations from local people, which demonstrates that this is in the forefront of their minds. With regard to the right-hand turn, would it not be possible to explore options such as the business working collaboratively with the council in providing the vehicle registrations for vehicles coming to and from the site in order to ensure that they weren't going through the village? I know from where I live, having HGVs coming through past old houses that are stone and such sites can be a big trouble, and wanted to explore this. That's what I'd like to say for now. Thank you.
Well, I am unmuted, thank you. I mean, the application was accompanied by a transport assessment, which the County Council has in turn assessed. And the view is the uses of a size where the vehicle movements do not cause any problems, such that we don't need to explore things such as signs. But of course, we could always encourage, outside of the planning process, that the applicant and the County Council talk to each other and explore the possibility of additional signage in the village. Thank you, Chairman. I will also pick up on one other point as well, in terms of this statement that the roads are substandard. I mean, if that's the case, that's not the same as unacceptable, of course, and the County Council haven't told us that this application is unacceptable. But I'll put that back to you, Chairman. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Sophie, any other speakers?
No, Chairman, not in the chat at the moment.
Yes, I am. Are you happy for me to go next, Chairman?
Lee, go on. Can you hear?
Thank you. Yes, I can. Yes. Thank you, Chairman. My first point is just an observation, really, and that is that it is a shame that it's been deemed not necessary for a right-hand turn. But then I can understand that actually putting a right-hand turn doesn't mean that it will be observed by anybody. And the reason I think it's a shame is that any lorry, any vehicle leaving that site heading to the east of the country will probably just follow their sat-nav. And anybody that enters a sat-nav postcode to the east of the country that's leaving this site will probably be taken through the village. So I guess they will follow the sat-nav and they will go through the village regardless of a sign that now has been deemed is not necessary anyway. But my actual question, I'm just slightly confused on the application. Am I right in thinking then that there was a planning application put in for this site that this committee refused, that the applicant ignored, and is now applying retrospectively for, albeit it's been slightly tweaked? I got slightly confused over that.
Councillor Wilkes, since there was an application before which we refused, and this application is fairly similar apart from those 3 areas that the officers have agreed with them. So that's as much as we can probably say for the moment.
Thank you, Chair.
Andy, your turn next. Councillor Mercer, can you hear?
I could.
Muted.
I could hear you, but I couldn't find my cursor on the screen to unmute. The interesting thing is that the application we turned down before was retrospective. Yes. When it was turned down, they carried on as before, and this is a subsequent application, which is also retrospective. They have ameliorated the application slightly, but it's still still retrospective, and they're still not in compliance with their existing planning consent.
Agreed. Anyone else?
Chairman, Councillor Pentland would like to speak, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going off the points that my fellow councillors raised there with regard to the previous application that was refused. I'm looking here at the refusal reasons this committee gave in relation to that application. And it seems to me that, broadly speaking, these would still hold in relation to this application. I just wondered if I could get an officer's comments as to perhaps why the previous refusal reasons would or wouldn't hold weight in relation to this application. Thank you.
Gavin?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the application, it is materially different, or obviously there are similarities, and that has led to a rebalancing of the planning merits of the application. I mean, previously there were concerns that we've heard about already about there being this isn't jobs for local people, but I think we've established, of course, that this does provide opportunities for jobs in the rural area. I mean, if we look at paragraph 84 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which is repeated in paragraph 7.9 and 7.10 of this report now, it refers to decisions recognising that sites to meet local business and community needs in rural areas may have to be found adjacent to or beyond existing settlements. And it goes on to say that in locations that are not well served by public transport, it will be important to ensure that development is sensitive to its surroundings, does not have an unacceptable impact on local roads, which of course we know from the County Council that this does not, and also it exploits opportunities to make the location more sustainable. And the framework refers to, by example, improving access on foot. And we know that one of the previous refusal reasons was about this lack of cycle and pedestrian access to the site from the village. But I think if we focus on paragraph 84 of the planning policy framework, it doesn't set a decision-making test. It doesn't say that planning applications should be refused where opportunities to cycle on or walk on footpaths to the site can't be provided. It refers to opportunities, the exploitation of opportunities, which in this case don't exist. So all in all, it's a rebalancing exercise and a careful assessment of this new application against policy. So back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gavin. So,
Chairman, Councillor Jill Mercer, Chairman.
Jill?
Thank you, Chairman. I just realised that we haven't actually got the previous refusal reasons, so I just wonder whether one of the officers could enlighten us what they were.
Can I take that, Chairman?
Yeah.
Can I take that? It's in the refusal reasons previously are reported under paragraph 2.2 of this committee report.
Thank you.
And they refer to, the first one is it's outside the settlement boundary, concerns about scale and location, and as I just mentioned previously, accessibility on cycle, foot or public transport. And the second reason refers to, if I'm reading correctly, disturbance in terms of noise, vibration, smell. And of course we've heard tonight and you've read in your report that there is no objection from the Council's environmental health team. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, Jill. Sophie, anyone else want to speak?
Yes, Councillor Andy Mercer, Chairman.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Very interesting that second reason for refusal, that this time around there is no objection from the Council's Environmental Health Department. Can we check whether there was an objection from them last time, or whether the committee gave that as a reason for refusal, which was not overturned as appeal, I might add, and was actually just put in there by the councillors in the committee without an officer recommendation? Can we check back, please?
Are you doing that, Gavin?
I can. Yep. Give me a few moments though. Talk amongst yourselves. There's a few passwords needed to interrogate the system in that way.
Okay.
Chair, while we've got an opportunity, could I just say on the next application, can we revert back to the round robin that we've previously been doing?
And go to them for comments. Okay, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Sophie, do we have any other hands up or anyone in the chat room?
No one at the moment in the meeting chat. Also at this moment, can I just ask if anyone does want to speak? I can only see a certain number of faces at one time, so I won't necessarily see hands. So if we could just
it's with the chat room you're looking at, because I can see the faces as well.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
We're just fighting for time, aren't we, while Gavin sorts himself out.
We're not far off, Chairman.
Good.
Good. Just opening up a few windows.
If I may say, Chairman, as a general thing, while we're waiting, it'd be very helpful when these applications have been refused once to have the reasons they were refused the first time, because then we can see if they've been knocked off, i.e. they've actually changed the application, or whether they are just the same. Then we wouldn't have this. I mean, there are other applications where there was a previous refusal, and really having the previous reasons for refusal would be very helpful.
Councillor Hughes, I think the officer Gavin has explained that they are actually in the committee report.
Which point are they at, Gavin?
2.2, paragraph 2.2 is the previous reasons for refusal.
The refusals, reasons are given there.
I mean, I think I have an answer. You'll be pleased to know. Reading from the Environmental Protection Officer's comments on the previous application, there was no objection from Environmental Health.
Okay. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman. That's what I recalled, that last time the Environmental Health Officer did not object. He's not objected this time. Last time we used that as a reason for refusal, and for better or worse, it stood the test of time. It wasn't slapped down by anyone. That says to me that if we so wished, we could use that same reason for refusal if we are of the belief that there has not been a significant reduction in the intensity of use of the site. So there is a possible reason for refusal there if the committee were so minded.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So, yes, Gavin.
Sorry, if I could just come back to that point, if I may, Chairman, that Councillor Mercer made. No, you're quite right. I'm glad that you that your recollection was as good as my searching. But yes, you're right. The Environmental Health Officer didn't have an objection to the previous application. For whatever reasons, the committee decided to impose that reason for refusal. That wasn't, of course, tested because the application was previous refusal was never subject to an appeal. But of course, if you want to or are considering a reason for refusal like that again, you'll need to consider what evidence that you have that the Environmental Health Officer didn't have in that reaching the decision not to recommend refusal. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I think that's the debate done with for the moment. So can we go back to Councillor Shetlock for a proposal?
Thank you, Chair. I still do have reservations about the traffic issues, but I guess there's not a great deal I can do about that, is there? I feel I've got no choice in that case but to propose granting this application, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. May I have a seconder? Councillor Thomas, you seconding it, are you? We can't hear you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'll second that proposal.
Right. So we'll put that to the vote then, girls and guys, and we'll do a round robin amongst each of you one at a time. And we will record the either approval of the objection or refusal of the objection. The proposal is to accept the application, isn't it? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go around. Councillor Hughes?
Against.
Councillor Burt-Jackson?
I don't believe Councillor Burt-Jackson is present, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer?
Abstain.
Councillor Jill Mercer?
For.
Councillor Harriet Pentland?
Against the proposal.
Councillor Shatlock, which you've already proposed, haven't you? Councillor Alex Smith?
For the proposal, Chair.
Councillor Peter Thomas?
For.
Councillor Robin Underwood?
For.
Councillor Lee Wilkes?
Against.
I think that's everyone that's present, isn't it?
I think there's also Councillor Lance Jones.
That's correct. I am here and I'm abstain. Thank you.
And also Councillor Wathen.
For.
Thank you. Just bear with me. That's 6 for the motion to grant, 3 against the motion to grant, and 2 abstentions.
So that's carried. Thank you. Let's move on to the second application for tonight. We now move to page 20.
Chair, if I may, I believe we're doing the Woodford application now. I think we changed the agenda list, haven't we?
Say again, Dean.
I believe we're doing the Woodford application now.
I thought we were doing that at point 3, the next application. Isn't that what you said?
I believe we were doing
Carolyn?
I thought we were doing the dogs next and then Ditchford third, but it's up to you, Chair, whatever order you want to do it in.
Let's do the application on Ditchford now, and then we'll do the Woodford application at point 3. Because that's what I've got written in the notes.
Okay.
So we're looking at this application on page 20, and Officer Beige is going to take us through it.
Yes, hello, Chair.
Oh yes, there, I couldn't see you.
No, I've just appeared. Right. Okay, so good evening. This application is for the retention of a farm shop at Glebe Meadow, Ditchford Lane, and is brought before members tonight due to the Town Council's objection, which is contrary to the officer's recommendation of approval. Here's the site plan of Ditchford Lock. The section of site that we're concerned about this evening is outlined in red. The site consists of an established access drive and porter cabins. Here's an overhead aerial view of the site. This is Ditchford Road here. The existing access just here, which leads into the site, opposite the industrial area just here, and the river Nen that winds its way through to Rushton Lakes, which is off the screen to the right there. As this is a retrospective application, there's only a very basic site plan showing the location of the shop, with more than sufficient parking and turning areas. On some photos, when you enter the site, there's a sign up telling you what kind of produce is sold at the shop. We've got potatoes, eggs, honey, coal logs, alpaca fleece. There's a lot of alpacas on the site, and they use the fur there. These are the porta cabins in question. The one you can see there has the shop in. It's just at the other angle of the porta cabin. You can see the access road that leads to the left is extremely wide. It runs down to the access at the bottom there. So as the officer report details, the site has a complex and varied planning history, which is an important factor and has built a case to result in a recommendation of approval for this one. In 2010, planning permission was granted for the change of use to a canoe hire service, including the erection of a porta cabin and storage container, which are the two you can see in the photograph. The permission importantly granted consent for an unrestricted porta cabin and storage container on the site. The porta cabin and storage container therefore benefit from planning permission and can remain on the site in their current position indefinitely. Planning permission was then granted to regularise the farm shop on site in 2013. This permission approved the principle of a farm shop in this location, but limited the consent to a temporary 3-year period, with the aim of the council being to allow the applicant to replace the temporary building with a permanent, more attractive building within this time frame. By 2017, the Canoe 2 business had relocated to Rushton Lakes, and the temporary farm shop building was removed. It was at this point that the farm shop moved into the former Canoe 2 shipping container and continued trading. At this point, it should be noted that the shipping container benefits from planning permission, whilst the principle of the farm shop upon the site is also established. The applicant effectively has an approved use, which is the farm shop, within an approved building, which is the shipping container. Now, I will agree that the approved shipping containers are not the most aesthetically pleasing buildings, but the position the council finds itself in is that these can remain in situ by virtue of the 2010 permission that didn't require their removal. Any other building on site which has been required to be removed has been removed. The farm shop is therefore utilising the reuse of a redundant building in the countryside, which is in accordance with the Joint Core Strategy Policy 11. Furthermore, in general policy terms, the NPPF and Policy 25 of the Joint Core Strategy support rural economic development and diversification. So this scheme does have significant policy support in its own right, and it does provide a function for the approved camping, caravanning and moorings on site, along with passing trade along the Ditchwood Road. Finally, the committee briefing threw up some questions in regards to highways safety. I would therefore draw members' attention to the committee update sheet, where the Highway Authority have now withdrawn their objection. Essentially, it was considered that the approved use of the Canoe 2 business was far more intensive than solely the farm use, the farm shop use even. And therefore, on that basis, the current position on site is far safer and less intense than the previous use, which is an approved use. And because of this, the existing access arrangements are deemed more than adequate. The recommendation is therefore one of approval, subject to the conditions attached to the report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now we move to the speakers. We have another 3. The first one of which is Councillor Paul Harley, who represents Rushton Town Council.
Good evening. Good evening. This retrospective application is clearly contrary to Policy 13 of the Core Spatial Strategy. The nature of the development is not appropriate to the surrounding area. No need has been identified for the retention of the farm shop. The development site is in a remote, unsustainable location in respect to foot and vehicular access. All journeys to the site would need to be made by private transport, as there are no public transport links to the site, and is therefore contrary to Policy 13 rural exceptions. The comments from the Highways Agency indicate that access from Ditchford Lane onto the site is substandard and visibility displays are not adequate for this road, which at peak times can be very busy. This road is used as a shortcut into both Rushden and Erthinborough and to gain access to the A45, and therefore it is crucial that any accesses onto this road are safe. We are concerned about the visual impact of this site, as on the Nen Valley. Destination Nen Valley has been working very hard to promote the whole of the Nen Valley, and this site does not enhance the natural environment in any way. Historically, there has been continual problems with the visual appearance of the site, and it would appear that previous recommendations made by E&C officers have not always been adhered to. Whilst we take on board the comments about existing planning for the shipping containers already on the site, is this the real image we should be trying to promote through Nen Valley? The whole site looks generally unkempt, and if E&C are minded to grant this application, we hope all conditions are vigorously monitored to ensure the visual impact does not deteriorate further. With regard to the farm shop, we understand that a temporary permission was granted in 2013 with the proviso that a permanent aesthetically pleasing building would be erected to house the shop in due course. In fact, the farm shop has now been relocated to a previously permitted shipping container, which does not promote a good example and design and sustainability of the site. In conclusion, this site has been an eyesore for a number of years and should E&C be minded to grant this application, we trust that strong monitoring will be carried out by E&C enforcement officers to ensure all conditions are complied with and the visual appearance of the site improved accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And the second speaker is Councillor Dorothy Maxwell, who is the ward member.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Dorothy. Speak up.
Oh, sorry. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, councillors and residents. Regarding this application, I've actually went down to visit this site myself personally on Saturday, and this is in my ward. And I would like to say that whilst the containers don't look exactly desirable, but as somebody who's actually been on barge holidays, I would like to say that getting a pint of milk or some eggs on the way through on a river is great, because otherwise, how are you supposed to get to the shops on a barge? And I think that needs to be looked at. Whilst it doesn't look particularly pleasing, the actual containers, I think that a lick of paint wouldn't come amiss. I feel that whilst some aspects of it may look undesirable, I feel the benefits to the people going along the river outweighs this. He only sells milk and eggs and potatoes and nothing more. And on top of that, they are now doing up barges down there, which creates jobs. And I think that has to be a plus factor in this area. So therefore, I feel, why has this come forward? Because at the end of the day, it's about serving the community, encouraging people to come along on the river. They can stop off, park up, and then they could in fact go to Rushden Lakes if they wish to. Apart from that, they can get a pint of milk and some eggs and enjoy their holiday. So therefore, I would like to see this application carried forward, but with the proviso that maybe he paints the containers until he's able to purchase a proper little shop. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And the third speaker is Andrew Middleditch again, who is the agent on this one also.
Hello there, Chair. You can hear me.
Yes, I can, Andrew.
Thank you again. Apologies that you have me twice in one evening. This too is a retrospective application, but it is for an activity which has previously been approved by this authority. As your report confirms, permission was granted in 2013 for the farm shop to operate from a different building on a temporary basis. The structure that is now being used is already consented and was previously used by a canoe hire company. It is a recognised building which is subject to a non-domestic rating assessment. Therefore, as your officers point out, both the use and the structure from which that use is operated have already been accepted in principle by the authority. The applicant has operated a facility in this location since 2010. It is a small business providing a basic but essential service to users of the River Nene. In addition to selling produce from the holding, including honey and alpaca wool, the applicant sells basic day-to-day essentials and refreshments to users of the river, including those boating, canoeing, fishing or walking. He also sells day tickets to fishermen and those wanting to hire canoes. He also fulfills an essential service to the Environment Agency, raising the flag to warn of flood events and reporting blockages of the river and the sluice. This is a small-scale activity which has never caused any issues and provides a basic and essential service. We're pleased to note that the Highway Authority have withdrawn their objection, and we must note that the access was in fact previously made up to a standard satisfactory to the Highway Authority and your authority. The application is submitted with the support of a flood risk assessment and ecological report and raises no objection from the Environment Agency or the Environmental Protection Officer. The applicant requires your support in order that he may continue to make a living from this small holding alongside the river. He has, through his own endeavours, sought to sustain a business which is compatible with and supports users of the waterway and meets all of the aspirations that this authority has for the River Nene as one of the district's great assets. We hope that in the same way that you've supported this business in the past, you will continue to do so now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move to the ward member for his opinion, and that's Councillor Andy Mercer.
Hello, Chairman. Thank you. This is an application that's not a pretty site, and it hasn't been for a very long time. But on the other hand, I find it very hard to see how we could sustain a refusal there, given that the site has existing permission both for the building and for the activity, just not the combination in the same spot. If they were 25 feet further apart, then they're legal. Very hard to justify refusal on that grounds. Having said that, I'm slightly surprised by the Highways Authority withdrawing their objection, because the situation is very different from when the last time this was brought before the committee. There is now Rushton Lakes just up the road with 3 million, or is it 5 million visitors a year. We're about to see Stanton Cross built across the Ditchford Lane on the other side, so the intensification of traffic on that road is going to be significant, and those are already consented developments. Therefore, they have to be taken into account when assessing this application. Having said that, going back to my earlier point, I can't see how you can sustain a refusal given that the activities requested are already consented and the buildings are consented.
Thank you, Andy. Let's open this for debate, and I'll do the job properly this time, and we'll go round robin one at a time. And if you want to say something, please do. If you don't, then indicate that. So we'll start with Councillor Hughes.
I can see no reason to object to this application because of the reasons Councillor Mercer has said.
Thank you. Councillor Burt-Jackson.
It's gone.
Not here, is he?
He's not present.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Jill Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Like the other speakers, I see no reason to refuse this application. As has been said, it already has permission, albeit in a slightly different place, and the building itself, I would agree that it could be tidied up a bit. There also is a new road coming out onto Ditchford a little bit further up that is also consented to come from Rushton Lake, so that will also affect the traffic in the future. However, without the Highways Authority wanting to object, as they've withdrawn their objection, it probably, wouldn't be sustained. Also, because the bridge that's there is an ancient monument, and because it's a one-way system and it's got a traffic lights on it, the traffic quite often just stops at this junction where that entrance to the site is. So there's usually quite easily to get in and out of that site because of the traffic lights. So I have no objection to it.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to Councillor Harriet Pentland.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harriet Pentland speaking. I concur with my fellow councillors that I see no reason for objecting to this application.
Councillor Jeff Shatlock.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Alex Smith.
No further comments, Chair.
Councillor Peter Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the past, I've been past this site many times, and I think I'm right in saying that the access or exit to the site is elevated. I'd like that to be clarified by an officer, first of all, please. And secondly, is there a possibility that the council could provide a grant for a shop that is good looking? Because I believe this shop serves the people who use the river especially, and this is an amenity that we should be supporting. So therefore I do grant this application. But I would like clarification on the access, if I may.
Peter, have you got an answer for that question?
Yeah, I wouldn't say describe it as elevated as such. I'd say you go down Ditchford Road, you come to the bottom before you get to the bridge, like Councillor Mercer described, and yeah, you turn off right into the site. It was built to the highway standards back in 2010. It is very wide. There's perfect visibility coming out of there, and as Councillor Mercer did say, traffic is often at a standstill at that point because of the red light one-way access on the bridge. So we're not talking about fast traffic there. That's what I can really clarify. In terms of elevation, I wouldn't particularly say it's elevated. So that's all, thanks.
I see Councillor Lance Jones. Have you just joined us?
No, Chair, I've been here since 6:25.
Haven't seen you before. So what do you reckon about this application then? Do you want to talk about it?
No, I have no questions nor objections.
Okay, thank you. Robin Underwood, Councillor Underwood.
Thank you, Chairman. It's the Councillor Robin Underwood. There are worse activities that take place down Ditchford Lane or Ditchford Road, and I have no objection to this application.
Councillor Peter Watson.
No objections, no further comments. Thank you, Chairman.
And Councillor Lee Wilkes.
I have nothing further to add. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. That's all the councillors have spoken. So we're now back to Andy, Councillor Mercer, to propose a motion.
Thank you, Chairman. I propose that we grant this planning application with the conditions suggested.
Thank you.
Seconded, Chairman.
Seconded by Councillor Underwood. Therefore, we ought to take a vote. So I'll go around Robin again for your actual votes for and against. Councillor Hughes.
Grant.
Councillor Lance Jones.
For the application.
Councillor Mercer, I suppose you.
For.
You proposed it, haven't you? Councillor Jill Mercer.
For. Can I just say, Chairman, that Councillor Jenny has now joined the meeting, but probably not in time to hear this whole application.
Councillor Harriet Pentland.
For the application.
Councillor Jeff Shatlock.
For.
Councillor Alex Smith.
For the application, Chair.
Councillor Peter Thomas.
For.
Councillor Robin Underwood.
For.
Councillor Peter Watson.
For.
And Councillor Lee Wilkes.
For the application.
That's a unanimous. That's
Councillor Barbara Jenny, did you listen to the whole of the comments on the application? Councillor Jenny, can you hear?
No, I've just come in the last 5 to 10 minutes, but I'd like to take part in the meeting from here on, if that's possible.
So, Charlie, that's the total vote. What's the final count, please?
It's a unanimous vote for the motion to grant the application.
Thank you, then that's carried. So let's move on to the third application for the night, please, which is on page 32 of your hymn sheet.
Chair, it's on page 91. We're going to the Addington Road, Woodford application.
I do apologise, yes, of course. Because we've had a special request to bring it forward because it's got to be sorted tonight. We've moved the agenda around a bit so that the final item in Woodford on page 92 now comes into the agenda at this stage. So, turn to the application, and Dean, this is yours, isn't it? Can you take us through it?
Yes, it is.
No, it's mine, I think. I'm the councillor for Woodford. Dudley's here.
Dudley, you're not the officer, though.
Oh, Dean. So I thought you said the
I don't
councillor.
want you yet, Dudley.
I thought you said councillor.
Dean, can you give us the officer situation, please?
Yep, certainly. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Right, thank you very much, Chair. This is application 19/01238 FUL, application at Addington Road, Woodford, for dog kennel use with associated other buildings with it. The application site is to the south of Woodford Village. If you can see my cursor here, that's Woodford Village, the southern part of it. This is Addington Road, which links Woodford to the Addingtons. There is a dip in the road here, which I'll come back to later on, but the application site is shown to be here with its own independent access from Addington Road. When the application was originally submitted last year, the access was due to come shared along this route here and then down into the site. But following discussions with the local highway authority, that's been changed to what you see in front of you now. Just in brief, the proposal is for 2 dog kennel buildings, which should each have a capacity of 20 dogs, so 40 in total, 1 exercise and training barn, 1 maintenance building, 1 quarantine building, and the total of all those buildings together would be 1,346 square metres. There's been a lot of representation to this application, and as I put at the bottom of the slide here, a lot more objection than support. But just in the interest of fairness, to go through briefly some of those issues raised, just summarising the support for the application is that there is a need for dog kennels. The access proposed is safe, there's enough parking, and there would be some local benefits and limited impacts. On the flip side, objections, I could probably summarise what's on the screen there as basically saying, well, there's no need for it, it's in the wrong place, there's highway concerns, no local benefits, and there's a variety of harms that people have concerns with. In terms of consultees, you can see on the left-hand side there, the 2 main objections come from Woodford Parish Council and the local MP. The local MP has become involved because many local residents have included him in their correspondence, so he is also written in to the council in opposition to the application. On the right-hand side there, you can see those who are not objecting from within the council. And I would say at this point, on environmental protection, we do have our officer Mandy Dennett here this evening, who may be able to answer questions relating to noise and matters relating to that. I would just say as well that there have been discussions with the local highway authority, as mentioned in the first slide, where the access has been moved to overcome their concerns. There's also been further information supplied to the lead local flood authority to allay their earlier concerns with the application. So now neither of those 2 consultees are objecting. All of these responses are detailed in section 6 of the report. The key considerations of the application, I'm not going to go through all of these because they are all in the report, which I'm sure you've read, but I do suspect environmental concerns will be a topic of discussions, which, as I've said, we do have Mandy from here from Environmental Protection, should you wish to ask questions about noise and things like that. But generally speaking, those are the key considerations there: the principle of development, visual impact, amenity, highway, ecology and flood risk. We consider the application is acceptable in all these regards, subject to the conditions as set out in the report. But I would also note at this point, on the update sheet, there's been further information provided in response to questions and requests made at the briefing about distances between this site and what's nearby, and also their present site in Grendon, distances between their site and neighbouring properties there as well. But in addition to that, there's also information there about other kennel uses within East Northamptonshire district, how close they are to residential properties. I think there's a list of 8 on the update sheet, and I can share the screen of that later if you want me to, if you haven't been able to read that. But in all 8 of those cases, there have been no noise complaints. There is also in the update sheet an additional condition that I missed off the report, which is it's right at the very bottom of the update sheet. Walk you through the environment and layout. So where the star is, that's the application site. There we have Woodford Village, Addington Road running all the way through, going to the south. The land levels do change in and around the site. They tend to climb as you head north and drop as you head east. They also drop into the dip on Addington Road. In terms of the site layout, this would be the entrance from Addington Road, snaking down into the site, the 2 kennel buildings here, the training barn, quarantine building, and the maintenance building. In terms of the elevations, the southern elevation where my cursor is now is the one that would face south, which would be away from the village, and that's where all the openings for the kennels would be. You can see on the left hand side there, that's the measurements. This is the floor plan of the kennels. This is all annotations of these various aspects of the layout, because it comes up quite small otherwise, but probably of more interest to most is where the dogs would actually stay. Each dog would have its own individual kennel with an indoor space and I say an outdoor space, but it's an under canopy space. But you can see there are dividing walls between each kennel, so one dog would not be able to see another. And as was my experience when I visited the Grendon site, that seemed to be very quiet compared to what I was expecting, compared to their current neighbour, which was a different type of operation where it was considerably louder. The exercise and training barn, this is the tallest of the buildings, but even that only has a ridge level of 4.81 metres. And I would say that buildings of this sort of scale are quite commonly allowed under permitted development for agricultural purposes. So if the scale of building is a concern to you, just bear in mind that in the rural context, you can actually build buildings of this scale quite commonly without the requirement for full planning permission. Not for kennel use, but for agricultural purposes. That's the 2 smaller buildings, the maintenance and the isolation unit. All of the buildings are of the same sort of design ethos, with sort of profiled sheeting for the cladding, and they are all clumped together in a cluster so as not to be too dispersed. So it would almost appear as if it were a farmyard, but a modern version, etc. On highways, I'm just going to ask you to reorientate your heads slightly for this one, because where my cursor is here, this plan's at 90 degrees to previous ones. See, Woodford is to the north, Addington's to the south. Where these little circles are here, that's 30-mile-an-hour limit into the village. It changes to national speed limits in front of the site. And this is where the new access point would be. The gates would be set back and the access would be 7.3 metres in width, which is to the Highway Authority's satisfaction. That I've referred to a couple of times would be looking from the site in this direction. This is a section through the dip in the road. There's been quite a lot of dialogue with the local highway authority about this, and I've actually been out with the highways officer. I drove and they sat in the passenger seat, and we drove up and down this road a few times to make sure that they were content with the information that was supplied. Initially they weren't, but we went back to the applicant, sought further information. This has been challenged by members of the public. We've continually challenged the local highway authority to make sure they are satisfied on this point, and they are. The site layout one final time, that's to show where the gates would be, and just to reiterate, this is the 2 kennel buildings, the exercise training barn, quarantine, the maintenance building. I've not annotated it, but there it is there. But yeah, the buildings are all clustered together, and I believe that is pretty much it. The recommendation before you this evening is to approve the application subject to the conditions as set out in the report, including the additional condition as set out in the update sheet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. Let's now move to the speakers. And the first one is Mr. John Sidey, who is the agent.
I'm not the agent.
Are you John Sidey?
I'm not the agent for this application because you've moved the agenda about. So
The first one is Kathy
I
Sharkey.
do apologise.
okay. I'll mute. Someone needs to mute me.
So you're on the next on another application. I do apologise. So the first speaker on this particular application is Kathy Sharkey, who is an objector.
Oh, hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm Kathy Sharkey, resident of Woodford and spokesperson for the objectors. In summary, the noise report is based on a single dog barking on the site, not 40. No night assessment has been conducted, and the report does not meet the British standards recommended. The current location at Grendon is over 2 kilometres from the village currently. The distance between the application site and 21 Addington Road is 200 metres, not 250, as it was reported. The tea rooms and the cookery school are even nearer at about 180 metres distance and downwind. The EPO visit to assess the noise was in the day. Staff were there and only a small number of dogs present, not 40. It is totally unrepresentative of the impact this will cause. This site would be on the historic conservation side of Woodford Village, where there is no double glazing in many of the listed buildings. There will be regular loud for continued periods in the evenings, overnight, and this will be a substantial cause of nuisance with significant disruption to residents' sleep. The DEFRA guidance recommends a member of staff on site for 24 hours. Continuous or frequent barking will cause stress and sleeplessness, a proven cause of mental health problems. Barking is considered such a noise nuisance, it even has its own web page on the ENC website. The noise barrier in the original proposal and promised to us has been now removed for the new entrance road. This is a major non-residential application which brings no benefit to our village. There's no identified need and potentially will cause unemployment. There are already 8 other kennels in the area. ENC planners have let us down substantially, encouraging the application with a letter of the 2nd of October 2018, inaccurate postings, missing information, and excluding the 150 petitioners' objections. It's in the wrong location, planning guidelines are being ignored, are inaccurate, overplayed and understated, or missing the guidance to try and benefit this application. The residents are very angry and disappointed. Beyond the noise, this risks road safety, erodes the green space between the villages, and will be an eyesore on our landscape. This would be an environmental catastrophe for our village. We are sure that none of the planning committee would want 40 dogs 200 metres from their home. We would ask you to be super responsible in your decision making. It would be irresponsible on all levels to think this could ever be a good idea. While these dogs wait to be rehomed, will you rehome us? Because if this goes ahead, it will go wrong. Welly Dogs said at the Open Parish Council meeting last year that this is their dream. It is their dream and our nightmare. Is it right to shatter our dream and our sleep just to realise theirs? We strongly object. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. The second speaker is Councillor Guy Banham, who's speaking on behalf of Woodford Parish Council.
Good evening, Chairman and Councillors. Thank you. Woodford Parish Council strongly objects to this proposed development, and our letter of objections is included in the committee report. I'd like to reiterate the following. Highway safety, the proposed entrance is less than 200 metres from the 30-mile-per-hour zone, but speeds approaching the national speed limit are easily attainable at this location. Visibility is curtailed by hedges and overhanging trees of neighbouring landowners out of control of the applicant. It appears discretion rather than policy has been used to approve the visibility displays and the sightlines. The Parish Council submitted video evidence demonstrating the poor visibility. There have been 2 accidents classified as serious on this stretch of road in the last 5 years, one requiring air ambulance attendance. The Parish Council request for centre lines on this section of road was declined on grounds that the road was too narrow. There is no pedestrian footpath to the site and the verge is a very uneven refuge. No formal traffic survey at the proposed site entrance was undertaken by the applicant. And no more than 3 full-time equivalent employment positions are generated by this large-scale development, with a reliance on an unquantified number of volunteers with no safe, sustainable method of access requiring them to walk on the road or travel by car on a country lane, which Parish Council monitoring revealed has an average of 1,200 vehicles per day. Social and environmental impacts. The 0.67 hectare or 72,000 square foot site is located on Grade 3 agricultural land, contravening the Joint Core Strategy, which prioritises existing employment sites and previously developed land. This is an open countryside greenfield development of a non-agricultural premises. What precedence does this set for the rest of the district? The site is only 200 metres to the nearest dwelling, which falls within the visibility display. It is much nearer as the crow flies to the nearest farm premises, a cafe. All noise abatement conditions rely on trees, which will take a minimum of 20 years before becoming effective. More stringent noise control must be considered. Extrapolating the noise made by one barking dog to represent 40 is hardly scientific. A full noise survey must be taken over a period of time of similar sized establishments to justify this claim rather than relying on a brief daytime visit. The case officers ignore Policy 3 of the Joint Core Strategy aimed at preserving landscape and paragraph 170 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which states planning policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes. The people of Woodford value this landscape. The Parish Council requests that the committee refuse this application on the grounds of road safety, unsustainable access, unmitigated noise pollution, and a lack of adherence to local and national planning policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And the third speaker on this application is Andrew Johnson, who is the agent. Are you there, Andrew? Andrew Johnson, are you ready to speak? Charlie, he's on the list of speakers being here.
He should be. I'm just going to check if I can see.
Hello. That sounds like him. Is that Andrew Jackson? Sorry, Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak then, please?
Yes, certainly. Good evening to everybody. Thanks for listening to us. A lot of the stuff has already been said in the initial introduction, but just to reiterate is that the development is situated at the southeast corner, at the lowest part of the site, and it's all Wellingborough Dog Welfare land all the way up. The furthest away from the village is the nearest property, regardless of what people have already said, is 280 metres in Church Street. The building would be sort of agricultural in appearance. We have suggested a green twinkly tint shed, basic for all of them, although that could be changed. The only consultee that has objected is the Woodford Parish Council. There has been sort of feedback into the Parish Council, but the rest of the consultees that have no objection sort of clarifies the situation and the potential problems that the council has brought up. I'll quickly go through those. There was no objection at all from National England, Northamptonshire Police, Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue. The Northamptonshire County Council Archaeology have no objection, but they were saying that you need sort of site investigation, which is normal for any development, which is very simplistic. It's trenching. This is all going to be agreed with the NCC Archaeology Department, which is fine. Northamptonshire Highways have now not got any objections. We've been through quite a consultation period with them, and the sight lines and the appearance of the entrance is to their satisfaction. Now, I know there was an independent report that was published, and I don't know where it came from, but it is in the Woodford Parish Council's notes. They actually used the wrong data. Instead of a 2 metre setback, they put 2.4, which represents another 20%, which the discrimination would be quite horrendous. I understand that. On the national accident records, or the Northamptonshire accident records, there's been no accidents along that road for the past 3 years.
That's 3 minutes.
Sorry?
So we have to stop you there, sir, because you've had your 3 minutes.
Oh, have I? Blimey.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Right. So those are the speakers on this application. And we now move to the ward member for his comments, and that's Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever had an application. I've been doing this planning for, I think, about 15 years, if not more, with so many people writing to me, phoning the council. There's been a petition presented to the council, which we haven't really discussed, but there has been a petition presented to council because people in Woodford feel this really will have a disastrous effect upon the village in many ways. First of all, I have a number of issues. First of all, the transport situation. Now, this site could be reached in 2 ways. It could be reached from the north through the village, but the village really only has a one-way system because of parking and the small houses on the side. So it's a single line of traffic through the village, and people coming from the north will presumably come through there because their sat-navs would send them that way. Or from the other way, which the NCC, I'm glad they've actually not just done a desktop survey and actually been out there, but they don't seem to, on the map we should see, we don't see the height lines. And in fact, you come over the hill, I've been along this many, many times, you come over the top, you wouldn't be able to see this access until you come over. And because it, as you rightly said, it's got 60-mile-an-hour limit along there, people are going along quite quickly along there, and suddenly they'll see this access to this site. Now, they talk in the paperwork about having open days. They have 19 parking places. So with the volunteers and the staff there, there'll be very few parking places for an open day. So it's impossible to park on the road, because if you parked on the road, people couldn't get through. It would make it a single track road effectively. And if it was a big vehicle, it would block it almost entirely. So people would have to park in the village and then walk back along the road to get to this site. Well, I think that would be very unsafe. If you're going to have a site that's going to be associated with a village, then there's no footpath and there's no intention to have a footpath, it really would be very dangerous. So from a highways point of view, or despite what we've heard, which always puts the rosy side on it and so on, I think it's a very dangerous place. And as I drive this road quite frequently, I know that you come over the hill and of course, unfortunately, the map we've not got the grid lines on it, so we can't actually see it. But we come over the hill and you then would be faced with the access where there would be probably lorries going in because they'd need feed and so on for the dogs. There'd be people working there and there would be visitors going there. In terms of employment, there is no employment because the people from Grendon are going to come here. So there is no advantage to the people of Woodford whatsoever. Nothing in it for Woodford. It's not going to cause employment. Maybe more volunteers may come, but certainly, and we know that that's fine. But I don't think there's any employment. As far as the noise and the smell, whatever they say about distances, there is a little tea shop in the farm just as you go into the village. And I don't think people will really want to sit outside the tea shop with the wind going that way and hearing dogs. And we all know that once one dog barks, other dogs bark. So we're likely to be faced in a summer's evening with dogs barking, which will clearly be heard stirring up the dogs in the village barking and making it really impossible for people to enjoy where they live. Now I turn to the actual paperwork, which is very interesting. There are two things in it. First of all, it says very clearly in the paperwork that they would not require a license to do this. Yet on page, that's on page 106 if you take the numbers of the application. Yet on page 120 it says East Northampton will have to provide a license. Now I don't know whether there's a license. A license is if they're going to actually have dogs and people pay for their dogs to be in the kennels. So I don't know whether that means they intending that that's a mistake, or whether in fact they do intend to have paid dogs using the kennels. If you look also on page 106 under paragraph 615, I beg your pardon, if you turn over to the next page, if you turn over to page 110, under paragraph 711, sustainable opportunities to develop and diversify the rural economy that are on appropriate scale for their location. I would claim this is much too big for the location. And respect the environmental quality and character of the rural area. This is not an agricultural enterprise. There is no justification for putting up agricultural type buildings. It will enhance then it goes on to say under section B, the provision expansion, the reasons for having sites out in the countryside, the expansion of tourist and visitor facilities. Well, I suppose visitors might go to the dog kennels, but they're not going to be visiting and bringing any economic benefit. Recognise that locations with access to local services by foot, cycle or public transport. You can't walk along the road. I suppose you could cycle, but there's certainly no public transport out there. Provide the greatest opportunity for sustainable rural development. Next, commercial opportunities related to food, craft, ecotourism and green infrastructure projects. They're not any of those. Next, the enhancement of local supply networks, linking businesses and consumers that support the shift to a low carbon economy. There's nothing to do with that. So under the very paragraph that we're quoted, policy J25, they really don't, none of those things do they meet the criteria. This is dog kennels with people who've been brought from elsewhere to look after the dog kennels, some volunteers, and with considerable highway issues. So I cannot see really reasons for supporting this application. I know we've had, as the speaker indicated, an indication from the officers a long time ago that actually this is likely to achieve support. I'm not quite sure why that letter was written, but still it's been written. When I think really any consideration of the local people, and it is a planning consideration that we have to consider the effect on local people. It's not listed, but it is something that's in the planning application procedure, that where it has a very serious detrimental effect on local people, the local environment, the local economy, we should take that into consideration. Not a reason for refusal, but we should take that into consideration. But I think we should certainly take into consideration the highways issues. We certainly, despite all the business about listening to one dog and then saying, well, 40 dogs won't make the same noise, I mean, that's just nonsense, isn't it, really? Despite the fact that we haven't really got the sound situation sorted, the fact that we don't know about the smell, because they say they'll keep it very clean. Well, if 40 dogs poop simultaneously, they're not going to keep it very clean, are they? Especially at night when they've all gone home. I mean, it seems crazy to have 40 dogs. People, I mean, I don't know about you, but if you've got a dog and you don't leave it overnight, do you? Because it makes a noise and it goes all the rest of it. They're going to leave 40 dogs overnight. They're not going to make any noise, these 40 dogs that live overnight. They're not going to make any smells overnight. It's just not the case. It's not right. So I really feel this application is not sustainable. But I listen to what my colleagues have to say about it.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. It's Mandy Dennis here. If I could just step in. You mentioned you had a specific question, Councillor Hughes, about the licensing regime. It is obviously an error in the report by the applicant. The premises will not require a premises licence issued by the central licensing unit because it's not a boarding kennel. It is a kennel that takes in strays and as such is not licensed. However, it will be run to similar, if not to similar standards as a boarding kennel, or even better, because they have to comply with the RSPCA guidelines on animal welfare. So whilst it's not a boarding kennel in the traditional sense of the word, it is actually a kennel that will be run with due regard to best practice and animal welfare. Thank you.
And will be inspected?
Thank you, Mandy.
No, it won't be inspected because it does not need a licence. We only inspect licensed premises.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Right, let's do a round robin and let's have comments from other members, whatever they think about this particular application, if they've got them. And the first one to ask would be Councillor Mercer, Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm really curious as to how this application got to this stage, because it's clearly a non-agricultural application in open countryside, and we have had it rammed down our throats over many years that you don't put non-agricultural applications in open countryside where there's not been a previous development of some similar sort there, so you're reusing agricultural buildings or something. So it's really puzzling to me. I would have been more willing to believe it if it was reusing some disused barns or something, but it doesn't seem to be doing any of those things. It seems to be a case of the applicant owns a piece of land and they're trying to put this development in the piece of land as far as they can from the nearest receptor, and it doesn't seem as though it's a particularly far distance. It's going uphill, so the noise will travel uphill. And I'll emphasise what Councillor Hughes said. If one dog starts barking, it's going to set the rest off. And if there's no one there overnight, they're going to bark half the night. Now, if we had, say, an equestrian application, then we would have a recommendation to refuse it in this location. We've had recommendations to refuse them, even when they were adjacent to the community facilities. And what's more, we generally take it that they require a member of staff on site to look after the animals outside normal office hours. And for that reason, we often give planning consent for a caravan or something for the member of staff to be there. There doesn't appear to be this here at all. This is, to me, a very puzzling application.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Councillor
yes.
Jenny.
If I could step in again,
Yes,
Councillor Mercer raised some issues, some questions there. The kennels themselves.
I did not raise questions. I made comments. Thank you.
I apologise, Councillor. Would you like me to come back on them?
Oh,
yes, please. I would. Right.
Thank you. The kennels themselves face down towards the south and slightly to the east. So the noise, any noise, if the dogs do bark, will be directed away from the village. What the noise report doesn't clearly demonstrate is the directionality of noise. Noise is very much controlled by which direction it goes into, and you will have the buildings behind the open fronts to the kennels. Overnight, the dogs will be kept inside the building itself. They will not have access to the outside areas. The building itself will comply with the BREEAM standard, or the very good BREEAM standard, and that includes a specification for noise attenuation. Buildings must reach a certain level of noise mitigation to get their BREEAM certification. So that, coupled with the dogs being kept in overnight, should not result in any adverse noise impact of the night time.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. So, Councillor Barbara Jenny, have you got some comments to make?
Sorry.
It's frozen.
Councillor Jenny.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Chairman. We did have a very similar application to this. Didn't surround dogs, but it was an equestrian use at another village, which we did find acceptable. Just out of interest, there is some extensive planting indicated on the map. Can I ask if that is a condition? Is that a hedge, or is that noise softening trees of some sort?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is it would be both. There is a landscaping condition on there, but it would also have the other impact of being noise mitigation partially as well. Am I able to also come back on a couple of other points that have been raised to this point as well?
Yes, of course.
Councillor Hughes mentioned paragraph 7.11 of the report, where I've quoted JCS policy 25. I've quoted the entire policy there, but I have then gone on in the latter two paragraphs, 7.12 and 7.13, to set out the context, as Councillor Jenny has just set out there, that dog kennel uses are typically found in countryside locations. This is no different. The other point I wanted to raise is on highways. When I visited the site, I've been here a few times, but I also went with the highway officer from the county council, and we left from the offices in Thrapston. So we took the northern route to the site through the village. We drove as far as Addington to turn around and go back again, and we did that twice. So he is more than familiar with the environs in which the comments have been made, and we've had 5 different responses from the local highway authority on this. Has been a lot of dialogue on it, and they are confident that they are content with the highway safety aspects of the application. Finally, on the open days aspect of it, that was an interesting point. I note condition 11, let's just find the page number of that for you. Bottom of page 118 is an operational management plan proposed condition, and if open days were of particular concern, we could use that condition to prevent those from happening, to keep them within the hours that are specified in that condition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jenny, have you got any more comments?
No, Chairman, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then Councillor Lance Jones.
Councillor Jill Mercer. Oh,
No.
sorry. No, Jay, Andy got in first.
No, these guys have turned up after the initial. Well, one of them did. Councillor Lance Jones.
Thanks very much, Chair. I very much share the concerns expressed by Councillor Mercer about development on Greenfield site. But I think with referring to Councillor Jenny's remarks about the equestrian centre, which we lent our support to, a similar development on a greenfield site on the edge of the village, I think we put ourselves in a position where we're discriminating against horses and dogs. And I'm a bit concerned that we don't give ourselves the wriggle room we need, or the latitude that we need, to have true planning grounds to object to this.
Okay. Now, Councillor Jill Mercer.
Thank you. Sorry, got my alphabet mixed up. Well, the first point that has been mentioned by a couple of other councillors, but when we look at any development that's not in the village confines, the thing that's always told is it's in open countryside, and we have to then have a particular reason, like reuse of buildings, etc. And has been stated from that paragraph that somebody referred to, all the different points on it. I can't see the justification for putting this in the open countryside. It's a considerable development. It's not just one small little caravan. And I'm worried about the visual aspect of it because it's going to be quite a sprawling development, and it's going to be in the open countryside. Now, when it's in the open countryside, the next thing that is usually thought about is a loss of agricultural land, as has been said on other developments. Well, it's grade 3 agricultural land, we can't afford to lose agricultural land. So again, that's a negative point from my point of view. And then we say it has to be sustainable. Now, sustainable usually means you can access it by means other than car. You cannot access this by means other than car. There's no easy footpath, there's no public transport. It's way outside the village. It's not safe to walk there from the village. So in terms of all of those aspects, I think that it isn't justified. And then we have this potential noise nuisance as well. Now, noise officer has said, well, they're facing away, etc. But I can't see how the justification of building in the open countryside comes in this instance. And then there is the potential for loss of amenity for the villagers, and particularly, say, tea rooms, etc., that as Councillor Hughes has said, you wouldn't want to sit outside there if there were dogs barking. Now, I know people will say, oh, well, if there's a statutory nuisance, you can apply. But I've had experience of noise nuisance. But if it's not continual all the time and you can't measure it and take a sounding of it, then yes, it might just be one night in 6 that it happens, but it still wakes you up and it's a nuisance. So I can't see the justification for building this in the open countryside from what I've heard so far.
Thank you, Jill. Councillor Harriet Pentland.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Hughes pointed out, this application, like the Titchmarsh application earlier, has a very strong level of feeling. And whilst I don't agree perhaps with all of the reasons that residents have given for objection, namely an increase of vermin associated with such a development, I do share their concerns relating to the noise impact. I would raise questions in relation to the assessment made of the Grendon site and the when the officer looked at the commercial kennels next door, and there was much more barking at the commercial kennels but not at the rescue kennels. However, it seems to me that you can't guarantee that with the turnover of different dogs into a rescue kennel that you know, there wouldn't be a difference in their disposition to barking between different sets of dogs. Having experience of dogs, I know that they don't need a reason to bark, and their bark carries a very long way. Although the update sheet shows that other such establishments are near to homes, I would argue that the strength of feeling on this application shows a concern in relation to impact on amenity. I also take issue in relation to the development in a greenfield site, and I wonder why we don't have the necessity for something like a sequential site assessment, looking at whether other sites are more suitable, as it seems to me that there is already an alternative site for this application. And although it's a very different type of application, we recently had an application for a school on a greenfield site, and the applicant had to go to great lengths in showing us why that particular site was best to build on, considering it was greenfield. Just finally, I guess a question to end on. With regard to any noise complaints, what action would be taken? And, you know, how is it enforceable? You know, with a boarding kennel, if you've got a noise complaint from dogs, you can say you need to send those dogs home, perhaps. But if you can't ask these dogs to move on, where else do they go? And there's not an application to have someone there overnight if that's the issue. So I struggle to see how you could properly enforce it, as Councillor Mercer has raised the issue of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pentland. If I can come back on a number of the noise issues that you raised there. As on the update sheet, you will note that there are a number of boarding kennels in the district. There are 8. The largest of the boarding kennels can take up to 102 dogs at any one time. A large number of these boarding kennels do already have residential premises not associated with the boarding kennels immediately next door to them and or in close proximity to them. We don't get any noise complaints, and I checked today on our systems to make sure that that statement is correct. We don't tend to get noise complaints from boarding kennels, and this perhaps can be seen as an extension to a boarding kennel type activity, purely because of the way they are managed. These types of kennels are very well managed. When I went down to the one at Grendon, I was walked through how they look after the dogs, how they feed the dogs, how they walk the dogs, and all the dogs are kept in isolation from each other. And as such, they're very calm and they're not stressed and they don't tend to bark. Members of the public and other councillors have raised my comments that the dogs at the adjacent boarding kennels were barking, and indeed they were. And the reason for that was they were all in open kennels, they could see each other, they could feed off each other, and there was a lot of stimulation to make them bark. So, and they weren't being managed at all. There was nobody there trying to calm them down. So I think that is the two opposites of how these kennels are intended to be run. Again, Councillor Pentland, I believe, brought up the issues with respect to noise at night. The dogs will be penned inside. I've checked again with the applicant a couple of days ago. I was fairly certain that was the situation, so I made sure that I was aware of that. I spoke to them. The dogs will be kept inside overnight, and there shouldn't be any adverse noise impact from them. There are some misgivings in the noise report. I have to admit that. So I took it on myself to do my own assessment, and perhaps that's not been reported in full, but I have done a lot of technical work behind the scenes on this application. I've also referred to what guidance there is available for doing noise assessments on boarding kennels and similar establishments. And I've done my own assessment, and that has indicates to me that there should be no adverse impact. That doesn't mean to say that you may not occasionally hear a dog every now and then, but when we look at the NPPF and the noise policy statement for England, we look at adverse impact, and that has to be significant, and it is my professional opinion that there won't be any significant adverse impact from this particular development at all. That I also referred to a recent planning appeal in Wales. I know it's probably not valid in England, but that referred also to the same guidance that I applied to this particular site. And my calculations and my modelling estimations indicate that it would comply with that guidance. So from our point of view, there is no technical reason why this application should be refused on the grounds of noise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Charlie, do I have to get a vote for extending the meeting as it's 8:30?
Yes, I was going to say that when Mandy had finished, but you took it out of my mouth, so off you go. Yeah, please.
Then what I suggest, members, with your agreement is that we have an extension, but specifically only to 9:30. Are you all happy with that?
Aye.
No later than 9:30.
Fine, then we'll do that. Can you note that, please, Charlie, that we'll stop at 9:30?
Yes, I've noted that. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, can I pop in at this point?
Can you what?
Can I pop in just to respond to one of the points Councillor Pentland made? Just on the issue of sequential test or lack of, I'll just refer, I've not put it in the report actually, so I'll just read this out. It's from NPPF, it's paragraph 89. It talks about when assessing applications for retail and leisure development outside town centres, that's where you need to have a sequential test. That's why one was required in the case of the Glapthorne equestrian use, because that's not agricultural either, that's leisure. This is not a leisure use, and a sequential test is not required in this case.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, moving back to the round robin, we've got Councillor Shatlock next.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Mandy will probably blow me out of the water, but this is just a practical observation from me, because we've got dogs and we live over 150 metres away from our vicar, and she complains regularly about them barking in the night, and she does have double glazing, and the trees that screen us from her are over 100 years old. So I do still have serious concerns about nighttime noise from the dogs, particularly if it's an unattended site, because what we find in this village here, and I think somebody else has pointed out, if one starts barking in the village, they all start barking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Can I step in again, Chair, if I may, please? Councillor Shatlock did say that. Again, I have to reiterate that the dogs will be inside overnight. They will not have access to any outside areas, and they will be within a building that is constructed to the BREEAM standards. And the BREEAM standards does have a noise mitigation clause in it, and we will ensure that that building is built to that specification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Next, Councillor Alex Smith.
Thanks, Chair. Normally, I'm all for private enterprise development and business. My only concern with this particular one is the road access. It's having, like Councillor Hughes, I've done numerous trips up and down that road in various vehicles, obviously all within the speed limit. And coming over that hill into that rise, if there's other vehicles in the road, if someone has to pull out and you're doing 60 miles an hour, I'd be really concerned about the width. It's narrow enough that you've got to almost slow right down to pass oncoming cars coming in the other direction. So purely from a highways perspective and a road use perspective, I find the access slightly concerning, and cars coming in, if there's half a dozen cars going in the evening or in the morning and there's people going slightly faster than they should, it does raise a risk of road safety. That's my only comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like to say that I believe this application is in the wrong location. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robin Underwood.
Thank you, Chairman. It's Councillor Robin Underwood. I've been listening intently to what people have been saying. Can I ask the solicitor, if we refuse this application, what is the chances of winning an appeal? Because it seems to me that the report that the officer has given, I don't think we have a reason to actually refuse. So if the solicitor is present, and I know he had difficulty getting in, what are the chances of winning an appeal?
Is the solicitor present?
I believe he's dialed in.
Is he on the phone? Charlie?
Mustafa, are you there, Mustafa? I was advised that he had dialed in. Ben, can you confirm if he's present? I was told that he had dialed in.
Just a reminder to Mustafa to press *6 on the phone to unmute yourself.
Right, so Robin, we can't actually answer that one for the moment.
Thank you, Chairman.
Let's move on to...
Mustafa's available now.
Say again.
Hello? Sorry, Chair, can you hear me?
Just.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you just. Are you Mustafa?
I am, yes.
You are, jolly good. Have you listened to the whole of the application comments?
I have. I think the question is, what's the chances of success at were this to be appealed? I mean, you've had in fairness, the environmental health officer has gone into some detail, and there's been, significant sort of cross-examining, so if it's going to be on those grounds, you've heard what the other side are going to argue. So you do need to consider, what was discussed, before making. I mean, the trouble with appeals is that it's difficult to judge. Having said that, I thought the environmental officer went into some detail as I was hearing her answers. So I would say that the committee should take that into account before making the decision. That's a, but it's very difficult to say whether there's a short case of what was this to be refused, that the inspector would come up with an identical view But on the other hand, the environmental health officer did go into some detail with regards to the grounds and the objections and even the letters of objections. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, sir.
You're happy now, Robin? Have you got your answer?
I can understand which way he's leaning. Yes.
Yes. Let's move on to Councillor Peter Watson.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm conscious, as a planning authority, we're here to do what's best for our district and the residents in that district. I don't see any direct benefits from this application. What I do see, despite what's been said about noise and noise abatement, I really do feel that it is going to be, or it would be, if we granted, it would be a problem for the local people. We talk about trees that will be planted to act as a noise barrier, but we all know that they take n number of years before they actually achieve that. It's been said by several councillors, once one dog starts barking, they all start. And if you've got 40 dogs in there, even if the building is built to the appropriate standard, I think that noise will be quite considerable. It concerns me because at night there's nobody on the site to calm the dogs down. So once they've got going, they're going to let rip. It also was mentioned that this site does not need a license. So just a question really. If there is a problem, what authority do we as a council have to tackle whatever that problem may be? Probably we have, but I just asked that last question. I'm certainly not very happy with this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, if I could jump in there, please. I also failed to answer the same question that Councillor Pentland asked about what happens if we do get complaints. We would investigate them in line with our policies and procedures to see if there's statutory nuisance or antisocial behaviour. And if we did find that there was a problem, then we would serve a legal notice on the person responsible for the nuisance, but based on the design and the layout and the proposed management of the kennels, that we try and make sure that developments aren't going to cause nuisance, and so we have to deal with them at a later date. And I'm confident that the design, the layout, and the management operations that are being conditioned for this application, should it be granted, will manage noise such that there shouldn't be nuisance from it, or under planning terms, adverse impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Chairman, I wonder if you would be kind enough just to let me come back on that particular point. The officer mentions statutory nuisance. I think a previous councillor mentioned that, okay, they might not bark every night, but it could be, certain nights. What is defined as statutory nuisance? How many times do they have to be a nuisance before they can become a statutory nuisance, please?
That's quite a difficult one to answer, because statutory nuisance isn't set out really in law. There's no decibel level, there's no frequency. What is a statutory nuisance is based really on case law in the civil courts. And for something to be a statutory nuisance, it must affect somebody in their premises, so within the boundary of their property, and it must be significant and prolonged, such that you can't reasonably enjoy your property. And to assess that, we would do a subjective assessment. We'd use our ears, they are the best sound level meters in the world, but we'd also perhaps look at some other technical guidance as well. So should a complaint be made, we would investigate it and base any decision on those civil law premise, really.
Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you. And of course, in the meantime, that process takes quite some time. So in the meantime, the nuisance continues.
Let's move on to Councillor Lee Wilkes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is indeed the most peculiar application. We are considering an application here that is in Greenfield, a rural location, and it isn't an agricultural application. So it's an odd one that we're even considering. It is just a private business that wants to build on a greenfield site. I was interested to hear the comments from the officer about the when one dog barks, the other dogs won't because they can't see each other. I'm not too sure how that works in real life. My neighbour has a dog, and believe me, when that starts barking, the other dogs in the neighbourhood start barking, and they can't see each other. They can just hear each other. I did listen to Councillor Jenny's comments that a similar application was approved. But of course, that was an equestrian centre, and horses are, in my experience, quieter than dogs. They certainly don't bark as loud. So I'm not too sure how applicable that is. I really just like to finish with a question. So the agent that spoke seemed to poo-poo, for want of a better phrase, the comments of the objectors and in fact the officers by stating that the closest building was actually 280 metres away, not closer than that. And I wonder if officers just could clarify whether he was correct or indeed they are correct.
Chair, if I might jump in again. There's been lots of talk about the distance of the nearest residential premises to the proposed kennels. I suppose it all depends where you measure it from. Do you measure it from the garden of the nearest residential property to the boundary of the site? Do you measure it from the facade of the building to the opening to the kennels? So you can get any sort of variance between sort of about 230 and perhaps 280 metres, depending on where you take that line from. The lines I've used are from the source, which would be the kennels, to the boundary of the nearest residential property. Councillor Wilkes brought up a very valid point in that often when you're out sitting outside in your garden and a dog barks, another one joins it and they all have a little chat. Having spoken to the applicant and visited the kennels, the reasons they are very, very well managed, so that if one dog starts to bark, then that dog is immediately calmed down and the problem sorted out, such that you don't get that domino effect of other dogs talking to each other. And the premises will be managed, very well managed, and there will be a management plan put in place that will be adhered to by way of planning condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. So that's the debate so far.
Chairman, sorry, would you allow me just to come back on those points just for points of further clarification? Thank you, Chairman. I don't think Officer Dennis actually answered the question. She clearly was trying to there. So the objector, the agent said that the distance from the property to the nearest neighbour is 280 metres. Officer Dennis quite rightly said that she measured it from the source to the boundary of the nearest property, but didn't actually give me that distance. What was that distance? Sorry.
I believe that from the source to the boundary of the properties is about 250, 260 metres, something like that. The distance is quoted by various people, vary anything between about 230 and 280 metres. So from the source to if we go from the source to the facade, which is where a window would be open on the nearest residential property, that would be in the region of about 250 metres without measuring it myself again. I did measure them all on ArcMap at work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so please, Councillor Hughes, can we have a proposal?
Chairman, sorry, just quickly, we've got Councillor Andy Mercer and Councillor Lance Jones that would like to come back.
Okay, Councillor Mercer.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back at what the officers said because I disagree with a number of the comments. The first one is we are not determining matters concerning statutory noise. That is a completely different legal regime. We are dealing with amenity, and that's amenity noise, which has completely different characteristics and completely different thresholds. With statutory noise, it has to be persistent. That's something the courts have been quite clear about, and it has to be regular. With amenity noise, it just merely needs to be disturbing from time to time. I speak as someone who's had to cope with a planning consent which was granted by this council, where the noise was deemed acceptable. Well, it was acceptable to the planning committee, but it's not acceptable to the neighbours. People a lot further from me have complained about it. Right, so that's the first point. The second is these are not boarding kennels. This is a rescue dog centre. Rescue dogs very often have been abused and are far more flighty than ordinary dogs. They are dogs that are far more likely to get upset, to get distressed, and when they're left alone, they'll start barking. And whatever anybody else tells you, if one dog starts barking, the others, even if they're in a different building, will start barking as well. So just saying they're locked up at night doesn't wash. Right, next, the overnight business. We normally insist upon where there is animals being kept somewhere, if they're at all vulnerable, that there has to be someone overnight resident there to look after them and to calm them. We're now saying here that we're looking at a place where there won't be someone overnight, but there'll be potentially 40 dogs. That's just not on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy.
Chair, if I could come back again on Councillor Mercer's comments, I'd be more than happy to. Councillor Mercer is quite correct, is when we're looking at planning applications, we look at amenity issues. We try to avoid nuisance through planning, and we look at amenity. When looking at this particular application, I referred to the NPPF, the Noise Policy Statement for England, and planning guidance to see whether the decibel levels would result in adverse impact. Having looked at my methods of calculation, I don't believe they will. Everybody's saying that there's going to be 20-40 dogs at night there. I did my calculations based on 20 dogs barking at any one time, and I still came back with the result that it should not result in adverse impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Right.
Chairman, it's just Councillor Lance Jones now.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. I think we have concerns about barking, but I don't think anybody's particularly concerned themselves with understanding that the BREEAM rated building will enclose both the dogs and the noise that they produce, and I think we leave ourselves on thin ice with respect to that. I am concerned, however, about the greenfield development of this particular site and whether that affords, in the solicitor's opinion, a sustainable basis for objection.
For refusal. Is the solicitor there?
Sorry, could you repeat the? Sorry,
yeah, so for the benefit of the solicitor, Mustafa, my concern is whether the greenfield development of this site represents a basis for refusal of planning permission.
I mean, not according to the report that you've got before you. So, if you could be, I mean, the report looks into. Sorry, I'm just looking at the relevant grounds. I mean, the thing is, you could always put that as a reason for refusal, but and as I said, with these appeals, in the end, it really does depend on the day, but you do generally it's with inspectors and courts are generally held, they don't second guess and planning officers report or a planning officer's decision making in terms, so that is a very strong material consideration were this matter to be at an appeal, where the appellants could say, you know, the officer in question looked at the siting and the location and came to the conclusion that it wouldn't be detrimental, it wouldn't be contrary to the national planning policy framework or the local plan policies. So I think it's very difficult to second guess what's going to happen at an appeal, though. Did you understand, Council? What I'm saying is this issue has been looked at by the officer. In their professional opinion, they've taken the view that this is not something that would be either contrary to policy. I mean, they've looked at the objections that have been received. Does that help? I mean,
that's okay for start with. It's a bit subjective at the moment, but we've got to remember, members, that the officers have been quite strong in their recommendations, and if we go against their recommendations, which we're perfectly entitled to do, then the appeal process will recognise that the officers have said a certain thing. So,
that's it, Chair. You put it much more succinctly than I have. But the point is that professional decisions have been made, and courts have historically deferred all the way up to the Supreme Court, have deferred to an officer's decision unless it's been found either irrational or unreasonable. But I've read the report, and I mean it's in the end up to the committee to make that decision. But there's an element of subjectivity to it, so I concede that point.
Chairman, Sir Jill Mercer here. Could I ask a question of the officers, please?
Are you there, Jean?
Yeah, Dean. Could you point me, please, to anywhere in the report, or just tell me even if it's not in the report, what, first of all, the justification is for having something in the open countryside that is not sustainable, that only allows cars to access it safely, and that what justification there is for the visual impact of building in this open countryside. Now, I haven't really seen anything. A lot of said about the noise, and there's been a lot of justification of why officers think that the noise won't be an impact, though other people may disagree with that. But I haven't really seen anything that justifies why this should be built in open countryside and with taking away agricultural land and not sustainable in terms of transport.
Dean, do you have an answer for that?
Thank you, Chair. On the principle of development, I did an entire section on the report of it. Paragraph 7.3 through to 7.14 discusses the principle of development and how we consider that this is a suitable site for what is being proposed. Councillor Hughes was first to speak and drew members' attention to paragraph 7.11 on page 110. That's the Rural Economic Development and Diversification Policy. I did spell that out in full, and Councillor Hughes quite rightly pointed out that not all of those points are relevant. The general reason for that inclusion in there was to set the context, to say that this is a use that is quite commonly found in rural areas, and the applicant is already in a rural site on the other side of Wellingborough within our joint core strategy area. So in effect, it's a relocation from one rural area to another. If I could just have a moment just to check on the visual aspects, I have covered that. I just need to find which paragraphs they are. So if you can just bear with me just for a moment.
7.15 onwards.
Thank you. So yeah, paragraph 7.15 onwards on page 111. That's the visual impact section there. So if members just want to take a moment to read that and refamiliarise themselves with it, that might be useful. But the issues are all covered in the report.
What about the sustainable aspect of, or the loss of agriculture and sustainable only being accessed by car? Because we have application after application where we're told you can't get to it anyway other than car, so it's not sustainable.
On the point of not being able to access it other than by car, because of the nature of the use being by appointment only for people to come and collect dogs, it's very, very unlikely that people would walk to the site. And given the low levels of staff or volunteers, as may be the case here proposed, the likelihood of people walking to the site is very low. We have weighed that up against if there were to provide a footpath to Woodford Village, and felt that the actual visual impact of providing a footpath would actually be more detrimental to the setting of the rural environment than for maybe the occasional person taking a bike or walking the short distance from Woodford to the site entrance.
I think we were talking about things like volunteers accessing it as well.
Let's call that the end of that particular debate, and let's move on back to Councillor Hughes for a proposition, please. Microphone, yep. Councillor Hughes. Microphone.
Quite right. I'm muted to make sure I didn't disturb everybody else. Right, top of page 108 quotes the PPF, NPPF, which everybody's keen to plug. Quote: planning policies and decisions to ensure that no development is appropriate. A new development is appropriate for its location. I would say this is not appropriate for the location. It's on a greenfield site, not sustainable. Taking into account the likely effects of pollution on health, both noise and smell to the people living nearby, living conditions, that's obviously for housing, and the natural environment. Well, this is doing is imposing upon the natural environment a few tin sheds. That's what it comes down to. They may be special tin sheds with green paint on, but they're tin sheds imposed in a natural environment, which has nothing at all to do with agriculture. It's just moving from one another site, which, as you quote, moving from Grendon, 2.5 kilometres from the nearest house, to a position which the residents say is 200 metres. I think the residents may know better, but I don't know. Be aware of the potential sensitivity of the site. Well, I think 150 petitioners and 80 people contacting the council and writing in perhaps explains the sensitivity of the site and the wider area to impacts that could give a rise from developments in doing they should do. Any noise giving rise to significant adverse impacts. Now, we've heard very much about this noise from the officers, but the bottom line is a noise impact is subjective. You say it in the third, fourth paragraph down there. Noise impact, it depends on the person, all the equipment and all the rest of it. The bottom line, the noise for here, is this going to have an impact on the local people? Now, I have a neighbour who puts their dog in the garage sometimes. It's very much on its own, and it barks and barks and barks. We've heard from one of our colleagues that their dog, they can hear their dog start barking despite the trees, which will take 20 years to grow. So there'll be, anything can happen in 20 years. Then what do people do when they've got all this noise? They complain. Does anybody come out immediately to look? No. What can they do when they do look? Close the whole thing down? That's not going to happen, isn't it? When the people invested a lot of money in this, what can they actually do? They can't. And there's not any. And I think the officer said, well, if one dog's up, people quietly stop the dog barking. Of course they do if they're there. They're not going to be quietly stopping the dog barking at 1 o'clock in the morning when it's hot like it's been recently and everybody's got their windows open because it's so hot, and they're going to have this noise of all these dogs barking because once one goes off, they all go off, let's face it. And all this sound barrier and all the rest of it is we know from sound barriers put up elsewhere that they don't really work. They may mitigate it, but they don't stop it. And trees, well, I mean, they're not going to happen for a long time, are they? So actually, I think on the sound, that what it's going to do to the residents is really negative. And once it's there, there's nothing they can do about it because there won't even be any NC to complain to.
Can I ask you to move to a proposal? Otherwise, we'll never get it.
No, well, I'm trying to sum up. I'm allowed time to sum up. Then, as to the highways effect, it's obvious that already the NCC officer have driven nicely along the roads and quietly, but I can assure you that road is sometimes a rat run. And people drive along there a lot more than 60 miles an hour, though they shouldn't. It's very naughty. They drive along there because they cut through Woodford, up through Mill Street and up to the A14. And they will come over that hill and there'll be lorry turning out, car turning out, and there'll be an accident. And I think we're really setting up someone to fail from the highways point of view. It's not sustainable. It's not available to be met except by car. Nobody can go there except by car. All right, I take the point. They go along to get the dog, but if they're going to have open days or people come along, they don't just go to get an appointment to go and get a dog. They have to go and look. They have to decide which dog they want and all the rest of it. And the visual impact is it's tin sheds being put up in the countryside. That's what it is. Whatever nice tin sheds they are. The stables, in fact, which you quoted, were wooden buildings and so on. But these are tin sheds put up in the countryside, taking away greenfield agricultural land to put sheds up for something that's totally unnecessary because it's in Grendon in any case. So I would very much propose that we vote against this application and turn it down.
And the grounds, you said half a dozen.
Grounds, it's use of greenfield, it's noise, it's the highways reasons. Obviously it needs to be written out properly. I'm not suggesting this is and it's not sustainable, and the visual impact in open countryside.
Could you just repeat, please?
I want to word that properly, obviously sitting down and with the officers.
We'll talk to the officers in a minute. Andy, did you want to second it, or are you speaking?
I would like to second it and specifically say that this is one of the reasons will be paragraph 38 of the NPPF, which supports sustainable development. This is clearly not sustainable development at several different levels. Secondly, I'd like to give a second reason, loss of amenity. It's clear that this is going to be an R4. It's clear that there is a significant risk of nighttime disturbance for people from the dogs, because at least there will be no one there at night. They will be left alone, and they will be rescue dogs, which are the most vulnerable type of dogs of all, which need the maximum amount of support. So for those reasons, at least I second the proposal to refuse this one.
Chair, can we just come back and confirm the reasons so that we've got them agreed prior to going to vote, so that officers can just check that they've understood the reasons correctly? Dean, I don't know whether you want to share your interpretation of what was just said, so we've got a record.
On Councillor Mercer's, I have the NPPF paragraph 38, unsustainable, loss of amenity, particularly nighttime disturbance, because the site is unmanned. I didn't get all of Councillor Hughes's reasons because it was said quite quickly one after the other. So I was just going to ask if you could repeat those. Please.
Well, I was being hurried up by the chairman. I always do what the chairman says. But obviously, loss of amenity is the same thing as saying that this is a subject of evaluation of the noise, and undoubtedly there'll be noise and probably smell pollution to the people nearby. And of course, the cafe is nearer in any case also.
You also mentioned visual impact from what I heard. So did you want that as a refusal reason as well?
Yes, visual impact.
And you did also mention highways, but anything specifically highway related?
I think that's, I think there is a highway issue, and I think that is, but I'm not sure we want to list that as a reason. My fear is that, although despite all the surveys of the highways people have not taken into account the fact that this is coming over a hill and cars use this as a rat run. So yes, we'll include highways.
Highways.
Councillor Mercer here. I think Councillor Hughes also mentioned open countryside and loss of agricultural land. Personally, I wouldn't put the highways in, because if we're not, if the highways don't support us, we may lose on that one point and get costs. Although I agree that it actually is a problem, I would veer away from putting highways in as a reason.
I would concede that. I mean, I agree, the highway is a problem, but I agree with Councillor Mercer, who's obviously very experienced in this. We've both done this before. The trouble is with the highways, people won't support us.
Okay, on that basis then, can I confirm that the proposal is to refuse on loss of amenity due to noise and odour, the visual impact of the proposal, it not being in a sustainable location, and the loss of agricultural land? Is that correct?
I think that's correct. Councillor Mercer agrees.
Sorry, did you say in open countryside?
Which is seconded.
Yes.
For refusal on those grounds, and we want to take a vote on that.
Chairman, it's Paul Bland speaking, Head of Planning Services. Good evening, councillors. An interesting debate, and I've heard the reasons that you've suggested for refusing this application. The one element that I'd just like you to have a bit of a think about is consistency of approach with regard to your argument around sustainability and development in the open countryside and the loss of agricultural land. The reason why I mention this is because 2 committees ago you made a decision at the Glapthorne Equestrian Centre, which had similar aspects that you took into account in approving that particular application. So I would suggest that, that there are real similarities with that application. So there is something for you to think about with regard to the sustainability of that particular reason if you wish to pursue it. Thank you.
Okay. Chairman, may I say we're always told we have to consider each application on its merit. I'm considering this on that merit, not on one that went last week, last month or any other month.
Thank you, councillor, but you do have to be consistent in your decision making.
Right, I would say answer that. It's a very valid point, Mr. Bland, but my response would be the previous application was on the edge of a community and was walkable safely. This is a different situation. It is not adjacent to the community. It's several hundred yards down the road, and it's a very dangerous road. It's not walkable, so it's not sustainable. What's more, the people who are going to operate it don't live on the site. The equestrian one, they were going to be on site. So there's a very big, there's significant differences between the 2 applications.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Pentland.
Thank you, Chair. May I also comment that I thought part of our reasons for granting the other application in a rural location related to sustainability on the grounds of it being a business as well, whereas it seems to be different here that this is not a business in the same manner. Perhaps I'm mistaken.
You're right.
Anyway, so we've got the reasons for refusal, which Officer Bland has suggested that one of them we might want to reconsider. Do you want to stick to the reasons that we've agreed?
Yes, I do.
Chairman, I think that the reasons are still valid. Mr. Bland made a very good point, but the situation is sufficiently different that I think we can stick with the unsustainable location reason for refusal.
That's the debate then. So we've had it proposed and had it seconded for refusal on the conditions that we have just discussed. So I need a vote from everyone, please. That will be either acceptance or refusal of the application, won't it? So I guess Councillor Dudley Hughes, you ought to have a vote.
Refusal.
Barbara Jenny.
Refuse.
Lance Jones.
For the motion to refuse.
Andy Mercer.
Refuse.
Councillor Jill Mercer.
Refuse.
Councillor Harriet Pentland.
In favour of the motion to refuse.
What? Refuse, is it?
Yes, in favour of the motion.
Councillor Shatlock.
Refuse.
Councillor Alex Smith.
Refuse.
Councillor Peter Thomas.
Refuse.
Councillor Robin Underwood.
Refuse.
And Councillor Peter Wathen.
Refuse.
And Councillor Lee Wilkes.
Refuse.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you,
I don't think it was unanimous because I think someone was for it.
No.
Anyway,
Chairman, Councillor Jill Mercer, can I suggest that the exact wording of the refusal is delegated to Head of Planning Services in conjunction with yourself, myself as Vice Chairman and the ward member?
Good idea.
Yes. Chair, what the one that you thought was for was actually for the motion of refusal. So it was unanimous.
Yes, you're right. So that's okay. Thank you, Charlie. So that's that one completed. I missed something out there. We've got a quarter of an hour left on the time scale that we have extended to. I don't think we're going to get through the next application in Rushton in a quarter of an hour. We can't do it.
Chairman, I think I can get through the one in Raunds within 15 minutes.
And if it helps, Chairman, I'm confident that I can get through the one in Earthlingborough in 15 minutes.
So, Carolyn, do you think we could move and just do one of the other smaller ones?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Mark, it's up to you which one you want to take. I think Raunds might be quicker than...
Time limits or anything with either of them?
There's other issues about the one in Raunds, can I say?
Raunds may be quicker for you to debate than Earthlingborough, but there's a bit of pressure on the Earthlingborough one too.
So tonight we'll do the Raunds one, and then the other two we'll have to leave till next meeting.
I don't think we'll get through the Raunds one.
Chairman,
yeah.
What happens if we get halfway through?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I don't think 15 minutes will be enough time to debate the Raunds application either. If you think that the officer's got to give a presentation, we've got speakers, and then the ward member needs to introduce it. By the time we've done that, the meeting will probably have to close. So I don't know whether you want to agree to carry them over to the 23rd of July committee.
Then we'll have to, and apologies to those speakers who are waiting to speak on the ones that are now not going to come through. Apologies that we've taken so long and you've not got the chance to speak, but those applications will come back to at the next meeting or a future near meeting. So with that, I think we should close this meeting. We've done the three of them, so that's halfway through. Not very good, but we have debated well. So I thank you for your attendance, and I thank for the visitors turning up and the officers. Great. But I'll now close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Bye, everybody.
Ben, can you hang on? It's Charlie.